Hello everybody, I am Tiago with Attack on Tiago, and for today's video, I will be doing a ranking of the major Elden Ring bosses in terms of easiest to hardest. And if you're new to this channel, if you haven't already, please be sure to hit that subscribe button to be notified next time I upload a video. Also, please be sure to check out my community Discord server. It is rapidly growing with a lot of fun people in the server. The link is in the description below. So a few things before I get started really on the video. So the criteria I'm using to decide which bosses I'm going to be ranking are the ones that you can get from the PlayStation trophies. Otherwise, I'm going to be here for a very long time since there's over 100 bosses in Elden Ring. And then also along with that, I'm not including reskin bosses. And if you get what that means, then good for you. Otherwise, I'll explain. So there's some bosses in Elden Ring where there's like an upgraded version that you fight later on in the game. And I'm only going to include the upgraded version, so you'll only see in the ranking here just that one specific boss and not multiple versions of that boss. Some examples include Morgott the Fell Omen, Godskin Noble, Godfrey the First Elden Lord, Mohg the Omen, Royal Knight Loretta, and Ancestor Spirit. Those are all trophies that you can get in Elden Ring, and those are all not going to be on this list since they are better versions of those bosses on the list instead. Also, I'm not judging all these bosses if when I'm fighting them at, let's say, level 100. I'm evaluating these bosses in the point of the story where most likely your level would be when you fight them. And at the same time, I'm going to be analyzing these boss fights if you had no summons to work with, so no other allies. I think that is the best representation for some of these boss fights, because if, let's say, you had a Mimic Tier or another upgraded summon, it could render some of the boss fights, basically a lot of their movesets, completely useless, making it a very easy fight. So I think this is the best way to assess whether the boss was actually very difficult or if it was on the easier side anyway. So starting off the list at number 25, we have Mimic Tier. So obviously Mimic Tier is a summon you can get eventually later on in the game, but at first it's a boss fight. And Mimic Tier is essentially just a duplicate, a doppelganger of yourself. So essentially you're fighting yourself, and it's actually, quite frankly, very easy. You can actually start the fight de-equipping yourself of everything, so then the Mimic Tier copies you and essentially then is naked. And then you can quickly equip yourself with your equipment and your weapons, and it makes the boss super easy. But even if you didn't do that, who better to know what your loadout and your weaknesses are than yourself? It is a very easy fight, and it really doesn't put up much of a challenge, and it is last in these boss rankings. Next at number 24, we have the Regal Ancestor Spirit. Now, in order to unlock this boss, it actually did take some time as you had to light up some flames in the underground. But the actual boss fight really isn't that bad at all. There was a lesser version I mentioned, Ancestor Spirit, that would have been also in this spot since Mimic Tier is just so easy. But Regal Ancestor Spirit doesn't really have too many moves that you should be worried about. It prances around the stage, and then it does have a healing move that is different compared to its previous fight, but that healing move doesn't save it since you can essentially just wallop on it until it is done anyway. Really an easy fight and really shouldn't take too much time. Although it is a very, very gorgeous fight and it looks breathtaking. Next at number 23, we have Leonine Misbegotten. So Leonine Misbegotten can be found on the south side of Limgrave on the Weeping Peninsula in the castle. And Leonine Misbegotten is sort of the minor boss or major boss of the Weeping Peninsula, hiding behind the castle. And you actually see Leonine further on in the game as part of sort of minor boss duos or as just a regular enemy actually in the game. But as a boss, Leonine's pretty easy. They get staggered pretty quickly, they have a very low health pool, although Leonine is pretty fast, and they have some high damaging attacks that can definitely hurt you. But overall, this should not be quite challenging. It should be pretty easy at your point in the story. unless you speed run all the way to the castle. Otherwise, it could be quite of a challenge, but I don't think this is putting up too much of a fight. Next at number 22, we have Magma Wyrm Makar. So you also find other versions of Magma Wyrm in the story, as there's one in the Caelid Tunnel, and then there is also the Greater Wyrm, which is later on in the story in the Consecrated Snowfield. But Magma Wyrm Makar you find just north of Liurnia if you want to make the transition to Altus Peninsula, not using the lift. So Magma Wyrm Makar does have some attacks that can be quite deadly, as is able to cover the entire area in lava and magma, which can be quite challenging as you have to watch your footing, and if you're getting ready for an attack, you might accidentally step in the magma, dealing damage to you and essentially rendering your attack useless. But aside from that, Magma Wyrm Makar isn't that hard. It has a decent sized health pool, but the rest of its attacks are pretty slow and very well telegraphed. It's very easy to dodge. Aside from him covering the whole area in magma, this shouldn't be too challenging either. Next at number 21, we have Dragonkin Soldier of Noxstella. So I actually found Dragonkin Soldier of Noxstella much later on in my playthrough, and I was just able to completely decimate him. But at the same time, I was very overleveled for this fight. And you can find him definitely earlier on, so I have to scale it to that. And I can see him being a bit of a challenge if I faced him earlier on. He has some attacks that are definitely will keep me on my toes, essentially covering the area in lightning. Or also, if you want to get up close, he has many slams that will essentially render you being up close very useless, since it can do high damage. So you have to do a lot of ins and outs, or you get in, do some damage, and then maybe get some space back. But his first phase very easy. Phase 2 he gets wings, but at the same time I don't think this is too challenging of a fight, but it does pose enough of a challenge to me to warrant it over these other previous boss fights. But again, maybe if I fought it earlier on in my playthrough, I would have thought it was harder, but since I put it I'm putting it here because I fought it later on, and I'm trying to assess it best I can, and I think it wasn't too bad. I don't think I would have had any trouble with it really if I did find it earlier. Coming in at number 20, we have Red Wolf of Radagon. Red Wolf of Radagon is serving as the minor boss in the Raya Lucaria Grand Academy, the Magic Academy. And Red Wolf of Radagon actually does pose somewhat of a threat, as it is very fast and has a lot of high damaging attacks. It is the definition, though, of a glass cannon. If I was mentioning how these previous boss fights have abysmal low health, well, Red Wolf of Radagon is much lower. There's so many times and so many attacks that you can do that will just deal like huge amounts of damage to his health, and just rendering it already at like a quarter health or half health. And that is definitely a problem. But at the same time, he does have some high damaging attacks, and he's very fast. So definitely enough to keep you on your toes, but not enough to put him higher up in the ranking. But then at number 19, we have the major boss of the Liurnia area, and that is Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon. Now, Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon has two phases. Phase 1 is possibly the easiest first phase of any boss in the game, as essentially you're finding which of her students have the golden shell around her. You break the shell, and then she floats down, and you just wallop on her. And it could take 1 to 2 tries actually, but not enough to really warrant too much of a threat. As she does have one attack that could be damaging, but it's not too much of a problem really. But Phase 2 is really where it gets a little bit more challenging. Phase 2, you get transferred to this gorgeous battlefield where you're overlooking a full moon and you're on an ocean. Honestly though, I think it's more of a threat that you're so amazed by the battlefield that you've been teleported to that you get attacked like that instead. But Rennala does have some attacks, jokes aside, that are definitely ones that we should be on the lookout for. As Rennala is a spellcaster, so it's going to keep at bay as much as she can, as she has many spells that are very long range and can deal high damage that will push you back. And then also at some point in the fight, she is able to summon previous enemies that we have faced along in our journey, like the dragon, or the Bloodhound Knight, or wolves, or a Stone Digger Troll. Many enemies that will essentially keep us at bay while Rennala is essentially dealing damage from afar. And that can be quite challenging, but at the same time, essentially right when you get in there and you're up close with Rennala, she has, again, very low health. So essentially you just have to find your openings, weave in, weave out, and she'll be done in no time. Next at number 18, we have Astel, Naturalborn of the Void. Now, if we're given an award out for the most ludicrous, crazy, thrown together, random boss design I've ever seen in my life, it would be Astel. Combining a skeleton, a butterfly, some insect with multiple legs, whatever it is, a scorpion also too, like whatever it is, Astel's design is crazy and it is creepy. But that alone doesn't make this essentially a tough boss fight, as it's one most likely you're going to find later on in the story, and by that point you should have some pretty good equipment and pretty high stats. Now Astel does have some attacks that will definitely keep you on your toes, since it's also able to teleport around the arena if you get close as the pinchers. It also is able to shoot out laser beams from afar, but then again, all these attacks can be well telegraphed, and when you get up close, you can stagger it, and you can stay right underneath its belly area and start wailing on it, as it doesn't have any attack really to counter that. Essentially, except from like teleporting around the arena, that is. But I found Astel later on, and I did not find this too much of a problem at all. It has some attacks that definitely are damaging, but one that I think at this point in the playthrough, we should be enough to equip for it. Number 17, we have Loretta, Knight of the Haligtree. So I'm not talking about the Royal Knight Loretta that is found in Liurnia. I'm talking about Loretta who's found just in the area right before you find a boss later on this list. Now, Loretta does pose some of a challenge, as she is quite mobile on her horseback, and she can deal with magic and also in physical attacks. And I actually found her moveset pretty challenging at some points. She has multiple magic arrows that she'll be shooting at you, especially one grand magic arrow that shoots 3 tracking ones. That one's difficult to dodge. She has multiple 6 magic daggers that she's able to summon around her, and those track you. When she gets close to you, she obviously has her big halberd that is able to slice and dice you. It is a decent challenge. I'll give it to that. But overall, I don't think when we're facing her in the playthrough that we'll have too much of a challenge. Maybe if it was earlier on, I would put this higher. But Loretta, Knight of the Haligtree, I think is appropriately placed here at number 17. Now, at number 16, it will be the first major boss you'll fight in Elden Ring, and that is Godrick the Grafted. Now, Godrick the Grafted, we saw obviously in many of the story trailers, he was advertised a lot, and honestly, for a first major boss, aside from Morgott the Fell Omen, he is actually a little difficult. It took a little bit of time to get used to a lot of his tells and decide when to dodge and when to essentially go in for attacking. And Godrick does a lot of damage actually, especially in his second phase when he gets the dragon hand on his left arm. A lot of the flame attacks can definitely be quite challenging, and when you get hit by them can definitely throw you off a rhythm. It also has a grab with the dragon hand that essentially will put you down to the lowest of health. Godrick the Grafted definitely is, for our first major boss, and essentially for any beginner, would be challenging. But again, I didn't find him too challenging. I beat him in a few tries, but judging again based on his placement and where you find him in the story, and essentially since you won't have the highest of health and the most damage you're doing, I think Godrick the Grafted is perfectly placed right here in the middle. Next at number 15 is Valiant Gargoyles. Now, Elden Ring does something that a lot of the other Souls series games don't do often, and that is a lot of double fights. Essentially, almost any minor boss you find in the game, there is a double fight for them. You find them early on, and then later on, oh, they're in a double fight. And Valiant Gargoyle, you find gargoyles throughout the game, even in the form of Blackblade Kindred, and now with Valiant Gargoyle, there's 2 of them. But at the same time, the second one doesn't come in until you maybe have the first one down at about half or a quarter health, so that's not too bad. But when they both are on the field, it does pose some of a challenge. They both have poison breath, which is so annoying to deal with. And they both can hit quite hard, as one is Twin Blade and then one is the sword variant. But because of that spacing it gives when the second one comes in, you can essentially try to take down the first one really fast before the second one can even come in. Or if you even aren't able to take out the first one, I think there's a lot of moments in the fight where it doesn't feel quite as a duo battle, but still feels like a solo battle with just a large health bar. But there's still enough threats and movesets in there that is able to keep you on your toes. It is a duo fight after all, and duo fights are definitely one of the hardest in the series, so 15 is a good spot for Valiant Gargoyles. At number 14, we have Elemar of the Briar. So Elemar of the Briar is essentially a reskin of the Bell-Bearing Hunter, which you can find in the northern part of Limgrave. And Elemar of the Briar, if you look at him, it's just a sword and shield warrior. He's probably very close range oriented. No. His sword can be essentially telekinetically moved to travel pretty far out, essentially making it a ranged weapon as well. It is actually a very tough boss fight that I was not ready for. He has not a lot of tells. A lot of his attacks, you can't really tell essentially where it is going unless you really get down the rhythm. Elemar of the Briar is one that actually I wanted to put a little bit higher, but I think the other ones at times can pose more of a challenge, and there's some attacks that the ones later on can do that would definitely be some of the most damaging attacks in the game. The Elemar of the Briar is certainly a boss fight that is challenging, I think, at the point in the story when you'll find them. Next at number 13, we have Fire Giant. Now, I bet many of you who are watching this video and who have already faced Fire Giant may want this later on in the list. But for me personally, and again, I'm assessing it based on when you fight it in the story. For me personally, I think this is a good spot for him. Now, I'm a really good, I think, on horseback. The horseback boss fights, I didn't find too much of a challenge, and maybe it's because I just excel on horseback fighting. So I was essentially on a horseback for a lot of the fight, able to essentially maneuver around the Fire Giant's huge size and also kind of weirdly quick mobility. But I always kept close with the Fire Giant, always around its weak foot, and it didn't make it too much of a challenge. I beat it on my first try, but I can definitely see why it would take many people multiple tries, since he has some insanely high damaging attacks. Insanely high. And he can also 1 or 2 shot my horse, which was very annoying. And then in his second phase, he has one of the most crazy transitions I've ever seen, ripping off his weak foot and then opening up his new eye. And then essentially he's still mobile, even losing that foot. But Fire Giant, even though it has a ridiculously high health bar and a lot of resistances, if you are good on horseback and you're able to stay close to the back area and to his feet, I think this is a good spot for him. I don't think it would be too challenging to deal with. But if you didn't rely on your horse and you were on foot the whole time, I can definitely see why this would be later on in the list. Next at number 12, we have Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. Now, Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, first phase starts off as the Devourer Serpent. And the Devourer Serpent isn't too challenging, as essentially it's very easy to read what his attacks are going to be. Although his Poison Breath definitely can be a bit of a problem, since the Poison Breath lasts into his phase 2, which is definitely more of the challenging part. And in phase 2, Rykard reveals himself as the God Devourer Serpent, and this is where the fight actually gets a little challenging. Even though there's many of Rykard's attacks that are easily telegraphed, like his sword's attacks or when he thrusts his sword forward, it's his attack that essentially summons a bunch of flaming skulls to cover the entire area that is a lot to deal with. Because you have to manage dodging the fire skulls, dodging Rykard's attacks, dodging the flame coming out from the grounds, managing your stamina to make sure that you have enough stamina to keep dodging and maneuvering around all of this. It's a lot going on, and something that can definitely be quite a challenge if you don't have high stamina or a high health bar if you're getting hit by these attacks. But aside from this one move, I think his second phase is pretty manageable. And it's essentially also with the new spear that you get for this boss fight in particular, you can easily upgrade if you want before the boss fight, before you engage the boss fight. I did not, but I still think even without doing that, that it does pose enough of a challenge to be here at number 12. Just missing out in the top 10, instead at number 11, we have Morgott the Omen King. Now, we fought Morgott the Omen King earlier on in the story, essentially as our very first boss as Morgott the Fell Omen. But that was just an alias that he used to essentially ward off any of the Tarnished. Morgott the Omen King is where the true challenge lies, as essentially he's the same fight, but many of his attacks are hit harder. They have more of them going on, essentially with like his throwing knife attack, he instead throws 3 knives. He has his big-ass hammer, which is very challenging to deal with. And then in Phase 2, he is able to rain down a bunch of swords onto the battlefield. And he's able to also be faster, hit harder. Just a lot going on in this boss fight that can definitely pose a bit of a challenge. But at the same time, if you're able to deal with Morgott the Fell Omen quite well, I think Morgott the Omen King shouldn't be too much of a difference. Because at that point in the story, you obviously have a lot more upgrade stats. You're more familiar with your loadout, your equipment, your weapons, and even though he does hit harder and he has new attacks that can be a bit challenging to deal with, I think at that point Morgott the Omen King, even though he is a challenge, should be still not too hard. We have now reached the top 10, and starting off our top 10 is Lichdragon Fortissax. Now, Lichdragon Fortissax is another boss I encountered much later on in the story, so it wasn't too much of a challenge for me. But you can actually fight this much earlier on if you're going after the Fia questline. And if you fight this earlier on, I can definitely see Fortissax being a challenge. Fortissax has many moves that can deal with status effects, essentially like the Death Blighting, and also I believe he does Scarlet Rot, or another one that does status damage, which is very annoying to deal with. And then he also has many lightning attacks that can just cover the arena, cover essentially his whole body. So he's essentially everywhere around him, he's just covering it in his lightning. And that is quite challenging at the same time. Lichdragon Fortissax is definitely a much harder version of many of the other dragon fights, bar for one, which I'll talk about later. But Lichdragon Fortissax, I think, is enough of a challenge to be here at number 10. Even though I did fight it later on, many of his attacks still were quite damaging to me. And I bet early on in the story, when you fight him, this would be much more of a challenge. At number 9, we have Godfrey the First Elden Lord. Now, Godfrey the First Elden Lord, it will be one of the last bosses that you'll face in Elden Ring before the end of the game. And Godfrey the First Elden Lord has many attacks that are just massive AoE attacks, especially in his first phase. He is very close quarters. He'll run at you, be super aggressive, and be swinging around his hammer, or even doing attacks that just shake the entire area. He is definitely a very aggressive fighter, but also at the same time, I think a lot of his attacks are very slow and feel kind of delayed, which can get the timing kind of messed up with your dodge rolls. And that's why I think he is a little bit of a challenge. Even though, like I said, his attacks are slow, the timing is still kind of odd to dodge when his attacks actually connect. And then his second phase, that's where things really get chaotic, as he turns into Hoaraloo Warrior, essentially a beefed up wrestling version of Godfrey, where all of his attacks are strict, close range, grabs, grapples, throwdowns, or whatever it is, and he'll be non-stop coming for your ass. But it is still quite of a challenge, especially if anytime you get damaged and you want to heal or get your FP back up, he's going to be right up in your face, ready to grab you and ready to throw you down into the area. And that is enough to put him at number 9 on this list. Next at number 8 is the dragon that I mentioned earlier, and that is Dragonlord Placidusax. Now, I just have to mention how this is maybe one of the best boss fights in the entire game. It is one of my personal favorites, and it feels so epic fighting the Dragonlord. But back to the boss fight, Dragonlord Placidusax is insane. he keeps covering the arena with its lightning, which makes it a bit challenging to maneuver around. It has 2 heads, which makes its flame breath attack so hard to avoid, since essentially he uses flame breath to cover everywhere around his body and his sides and in front of him. He also has a lightning claw, which can deal a lot of damage in close range. Overall, his first phase, though, isn't too bad. It's his second phase that definitely ups the ante, as he is able to teleport around the arena, coming in like a comet or appearing right behind you to do a dragon claw. It's definitely a lot more mobile, and that can be quite challenging to follow its movements. And if you bring a summon to this fight, it would actually make it a lot easier, as I noticed a lot of his attacks are very single target focused. Even his lightning attacks that essentially would cover the arena seem to cover only the area around maybe where the summon would be. But when you face it solo, no summon, it is definitely a bit of a challenge. And then coming in right before then the end of the fight, he can teleport back far away, and he can, instead of his flame breath, he uses lasers, which can deal massive damage. Even if you have vigor of 50, your health bar will drop so fast from those laser attacks. Dragonlord Placidusax is definitely quite challenging, and enough to put it here at number 8. Next at number 7, we have Mohg, Lord of Blood. Now, Mohg, Lord of Blood, obviously is the upgrade version of Mohg the Omen. And Mohg, Lord of Blood is... Mohg, Lord of Blood is pretty hard. Even though his physical attacks, they're pretty well telegraphed, and they're easy to dodge, that isn't the bread and butter of Mohg, Lord of Blood. It's in his name. It's his blood. It's the blood attacks, the ones that deal blood loss. He has many attacks that can essentially throw flaming blood at you, or if you're up close, he has his exploding flaming blood attack. But it's when he reaches his second phase that things get very challenging. Essentially, the whole time during the first phase, he is putting these red rings around you. And at the start of phase 2, he's going to stun you and then triple tap you 3 times, absorbing some of your health bar into his own, requiring you to definitely use some of your healing flasks in order to get your health bar back up. And then he gets new abilities, he gets wings, and this is where it gets so chaotic. He starts covering the entire area in flaming blood, where wherever you step, your blood loss is going to start increasing, which makes it difficult. He can fly at you and deal massive physical damage attack. It gets chaotic. There's one way to really counter the start of phase 2, and that's if you got the purifying crystal tier in your wondrous flask, which thankfully I did. So my second time fighting it, I was able to use it, which was a counter agent to being stunned in Mohg's second phase. But I still got triple tapped for a decent amount of health that still got absorbed into Mohg. But either way, Mohg poses enough of a challenge to be here at number 7. Essentially also dealing with all the blood loss attacks, which blood loss is huge in this game, is such a huge contributing factor to many of the high damaging attacks. So Mohg, number 7, very respectable spot for him. Now, coming in at number 6, we have Commander Niall. And I don't know if this fight was supposed to be easier, but I did not find it easier. There's a lesser version that you can find in Caelid called Commander O'Neill, which I beat on my first try very easily. But for some reason, Commander Niall gave me a lot to deal with, and it was very challenging for me. The start of the fight, he summons these 2 warriors to handle you as well while he's in the area. And these 2 warriors aren't your typical low-life goons, henchmen. They're 2 armored up, aggressive soldiers that can deal a lot of damage. And they were annoying to deal with. And then after you deal with those 2, then Commander Niall really upgrades, and his full moveset comes into display, where he can essentially do a massive amounts of damage with lightning, wind, whatever it is. He's controlling a lot of the elements around him. And it makes going in very tough, as he has many attacks to deal with your close range, and then if you stay far away, he can quickly get right up close to you and deal some massive lightning attacks. Commander Niall took me a decent amount of tries to finally take down, and he I don't know. I don't know if he was supposed to be easier. I did not find him easier. So I think 6 is a respectable spot. I'm assuming probably others had an easier time with him, but for me, for some reason, Commander Niall, he had my number. Alright, we're finally at the top 5, and these last 5 bosses I consider to be the utmost challenging in Elden Ring, no matter where you are in the story. So, starting off at number 5, we have Star Scourge Radahn. Now, Star Scourge Radahn, in my opinion, takes the cake for most epic boss fight in the game. Essentially, being on a battlefield that covers half of the region of Caelid and fighting him is insane. But aside from that, Radahn has a lot of attacks that can essentially just destroy you. We have to essentially charge into Radahn from afar while he's raining down gravity-infused arrows or rain of arrows that can essentially do a lot of damage to you. And then when you finally get up close, he rides on this tiny horse that he is able to ride on because he's using gravity magic, which is also insane. But he is very mobile on that horse. And I was shocked by that, looking at his size and stature. He's very mobile and has many attacks that can deal a lot of AoE, that can just deal massive damage, just swinging his swords all around him. He has a lot of slam attacks. He has a lot of gravity attacks. And then he has his phase 2, where he is gone in the arena. He jumps up, and then he comets down that can almost, at this point in the story, almost one-shot you. He was a very challenging fight, right up until the end, but one that I definitely won't forget, as it was such an epic fight. But he definitely warranted a spot in the top 5. Next at number 4, we have Radagon of the Golden Order and the Elden Beast. Now this is a 2-part finale of the game, the final fight, the final boss fight, and overall I think this delivered on a very good boss fight to end the game, and one that is still quite challenging. Now in this first phase is Radagon, which is essentially like a red-haired version of Thor slamming down his hammer and dealing with light and lightning. It's very accurate, actually. Radagon it poses enough of a challenge. He would probably be around the middle spot if it was just him. Maybe if he had a second phase that was just him as well. He has some high damaging attacks in close range, but ones that are very easily telegraphed. To me, it was when he used his lightning attacks. I think the timing on those was a little hard to get down. He also has a lightning attack that can just slam down real close and then deal massive explosion. He definitely kept me on my toes. He was definitely enough of a challenge. But then the real challenge will begin in phase 2 when the Elden Beast comes out with a full health bar. And the Elden Beast has a lot of health and has a lot of attacks that can definitely deal a lot of damage to you. It has its golden ring, where essentially it flies up in the sky, has a golden ring around you, and if you don't get out of the way, that's going to deal a lot of damage. It has this gravity grab that can essentially pin you down with a lot of holy spears and then an explosion. It has many close range attacks infused with its holy sword. It's got many attacks that can just essentially decimate you. But at the same time, I never felt like I was in a rush or really was... I never felt threatened by a lot of his attacks. They kept me on edge, but I felt that they weren't overly overpowered to the point that I couldn't dodge them. I always found a way to eventually dodge a lot of these attacks, even though he has a lot of health. And when I do get hit with some of those attacks, they are highly damaging. But at the same time, when you ever get close range, he can be staggered. And I staggered him, I think, 4 times at least in the fight that, in the battle that I ended up beating him on. But he is still quite challenging. He is very mobile as well, as he can essentially teleport and dive around the arena to different spots, making you have to sprint all the way to get back to him. But he is definitely challenging. The combination of phase 1 and phase 2 of Radagon and Elden Beast puts him here at number 4. Next at number 3, we have the Beast Clergyman and Maliketh the Black Blade. Now, the first phase of this fight is the Beast Clergyman. And the Beast Clergyman is very fast and very aggressive. It has many projectile attacks that it can combo with that can essentially get you off edge and be unexpected. It has its Beast Claw attack, which is essentially a 5 beamed attack that can be launched at you. It has many combos at close range as well, and all of this is definitely a challenging first phase, but when you get him to half health, the real challenge begins, and that's when it is revealed that the Beast Clergyman is Maliketh the Black Blade. And Maliketh the Black Blade is so fast and agile. It is so easy to be overwhelmed in this fight with him jumping around on the pillars, doing these flips, launching these red beams from his sword at you. It is just so overwhelming at times that sometimes you can be lost in the track of the fight and be easily killed. And that's when you have to realize how to win this fight. You have to stay calm, not let the whole grand stature of Maliketh the Black Blade and what he's doing be overwhelming for you. You have to stay calm and dodge his tells perfectly and also in a good manner to not be overwhelmed. And when you do that, it's actually not too bad of a fight. But he's so easy to overwhelm you that it can just lose your rhythm completely and just you get decimated by Maliketh. Because he has some high damaging attacks. And also along with that, all of his attacks that use his sword can deal damage to your actual health bar and lessen it. That means you have a less health bar to heal back to and less health bar when you're fighting him. And at the same time, those attacks do damage over time. So essentially your health is ticking down and your actual maximum health is lower. That is a double dinger combo that is definitely hard to deal with. All of this combines into a very hard fight, and one that I actually wish had more health, as I had a lot of fun dealing with this fight, and it's definitely one of my favorite fights in the series, but also is one of the most challenging ones. Next at number 2, just missing out on the number 1 spot, we have Godskin Duo. Now, Godskin Duo comprises of 2 boss fights that you can fight solo in the game. That is Godskin Apostle and Godskin Noble. And in typical Elden Ring fashion, what do they tend to do with some of these boss fights? Let's make them a duo fight. And of course they do that for 2 already tough on its own single bosses. And this is where it gets very challenging for me, as dealing with duo fights are very hard. If you use a summon, then I don't think it would be as hard, as essentially you can distract one of the Godskins and while you take on one of the other ones. But I went no summon in this fight, and it was very hard. They had their attention fully on me. I had to make the best use of the pillars to the best of my ability. But every time one of them got into their phase 2, it was able to destroy the pillars around you, leaving you with no cover. This made this fight very hard on its own. And after you beat both of them, you would think the fight would be done. But no. They share 1 combined health, and when you take down one of them, they are able to summon the other one back, making it a constant duo fight right up until the end. This is so hard for a boss fight because it ignored all the rules that was set prior for Elden Ring bosses with duo fights. It's always a duo fight that has a combination of one that's fast and then one that is maybe stays in the back that is slow, or one that is very physical and then one that is range. With this, both bosses in here are fast, have a lot of health, can be huge and damaging up close. There's no balance to it. They are just both very overpowered, and with a combination it makes this fight super hard. And at the same time, it's not a duo fight. It's essentially a 3.5 boss fight with the amount of health that you have to deal with. This fight took me so many tries to get down. And even with that, it is still not number 1 by a landslide. But let me paint you a picture real quick before I reveal number 1. In previous Souls games, you have some easy boss fights. Now let's say you give that easy boss fight the ability to heal with every attack they do, or have a very hard, undodgeable attack. You wouldn't think it's that hard. But let's say you give the hardest boss in the game already, like Ishin the Sword Saint in Sekiro, or Dark Eater Midir in Dark Souls 3, the ability to heal on every attack, and have an attack that is also almost undodgeable. That would make the fight almost impossible. And that's what Millennia Blade of Miquella is. It is already a challenging fight on its own, since she is super aggressive, has a lot of high damaging attacks with her blade. And at the same time, all of her attacks can heal her. And it's not just a little portion that she heals a significant portion of her health essentially rendering many of our attacks and combos that we were doing in progress useless. And then to top all of this off, she has maybe the most BS move I've ever seen in any video game, where she jumps up in the air and she does a flurry of like 1 billion slashes in 4 combos. And it is almost impossible to dodge it, especially if you're already up close. You have to be so far away to even dodge some of the attacks. But she has insane close down speed that after the second combo, she's already on top of you and still dealing that flurry of high damage. And then to top it all off, she has a phase 2. You had to get past that whole insane phase 1 to get to a phase 2 where essentially a lot of her attacks now deal Scarlet Rot. And Scarlet Rot is so annoying to deal with. And guess which attack was given Scarlet Rot as well? Yes, it is her insane flurry 4 combo finisher that is essentially her God mode attack. And guess what? She's also more aggressive than she already was in phase 1. At least there's times in phase 1 where you have some moments to breathe, to heal up or get your FP back before getting wrecked. In phase 2, she is on you non-stop. There is no moment to breathe, no moment to just relax and heal or whatever. She's going to be consistently on you from the get-go in phase 2, making this not only the most difficult boss in Elden Ring, but in my opinion, the most difficult From Software boss that they have ever created in this game. And well, everyone, that is it for the video. I've completed this ranking, and this was very long to do, so if you stuck around through this whole time, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys doing that. I might do more Elden Ring content in the future, but we'll see. For now, I might leave it just these 2 videos I've posted recently. If you're new to this channel, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel. It really does mean a lot to me. I am Tiago with Attack on Tiago, and I hope you all have a nice day.